When we think about work, we often think about the 9 to 5 jobs that brings the paycheck home. But what about the work that happens inside the home, the work that prepares us for the next day? The cooking, the cleaning, the caregiving. Who does it and why does it matter? I decided to do my presentation today on how my experience growing up redefined my understanding of gender roles through intersections of class, gender, and my family's immigrant background. The major concepts I will be connecting to today will include social reproduction of labor, which I'm sure we are all familiar with by now, gendered labor, traditional and evolving gender roles, invisible labor, intersectionality, patriarchal capitalism, and spatiality and temporality. The gendered system that social reproduction of labor traditionally follows was most prominent during my grandparents' upbringing in Croatia, with their belief system sounding a little like men rule the house, women just keep it standing. This belief followed them into relationships, family, work, and public spaces where men always held the authority. When my grandparents immigrated to Canada, they all worked in factories, which was a big culture shock for both my grandmothers, as they were now expected to perform private and public labor. My mom and dad were both raised by their parents, encouraging them to stick to these traditional gender roles. However, when my mom had to begin working because of the time and place we were living in, everything changed. Before my little brother was born, I lived in the typical nuclear heterosexual family. My dad went to work, my mom stayed home with the kids. This way of living was reinforced by my Croatian family, Catholic beliefs, class, and societal norms at the time. Once my mom and other women in my life went to work, almost everything in my family changed. When she began working and household labor was divided among everyone in the family, I found that family events were no longer as separated by gender as it was before. When all of the women stayed at home and all the men worked, our family gatherings regularly looked like the pictures on the left. However, when the women began working and both parents shared household labor, there was no longer any harsh gendered separation, and the harsh lines between both genders were blurred. Even as my dad took on more of the household tasks, the invisible emotional labor still rested on my mom and other women in my family. This reflects when we learned in class how even when physical labor is divided, women are still expected to be the emotional, nurturing caregivers of society. This expectation was placed on my sister and I growing up because when my mom was not around to provide comfort, my sister and I were the next runners up. Gender expectations are significantly connected to spatiality and temporality because while they still exist in my family today, they are much more flexible than past generations. Being a woman who likes fishing, being extroverted, and being confrontational would have been unheard of during my grandparents' upbringing. COVID-19 also highlighted class inequalities because while we knew people with in-home offices and tutors for school, this was not the reality for my family. Now that my mom was back at home working, we innately expected her to also help us with school, comfort us, make food for us during the day, and keep our busy house clean. The stress she felt from this did not last for long because she was quick to push back against these expectations as my dad and siblings and I began to help out when she felt the double burden of both private and public labor. Again, this would have been unheard of when my parents were growing up in their Croatian villages. The change in household norms today reflects the connection between space, identity, gender, class, and labor. The shift in gender roles and household norms did not just appear on its own. It reflects the broader shift in society of families needing two full-time working parents. This recent shift will sooner or later shift society's understanding of labor and gender. Will men continue to be seen as the breadwinners? Will men perform more emotional labor? Will homes always be seen as women's spaces? These questions are important to consider when understanding the spatiality and temporality of gender, class, and labor. Thank you for listening.